Hey there. Ready to dive into something that might just change how you approach, well, everything.
Everything.
Yeah, we're going deep on the power of process today.
Okay.
We're going to be exploring how falling in love with the how can lead to way more success than just fixating on the what. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so true.
We're unpacking insights from this source. It's called Trusting the Process, the common thread of excellence, to help, unlock that for all of us.
Yeah, what's really fascinating to me about this topic is how easily I think we get kind of swept up in just chasing outcomes.
Yeah,
We crave that promotion or that perfect score or that like picture perfect life.
right.
But what this document I think really highlights is that sustainable success, it's not about these sudden leaps or these overnight successes.
Right.
It's about really mastering the steps between kind of where you are now and where you want to be.
It's kind of like that saying, enjoy the journey, not just the destination,
Yes.
but applied to literally every part of life.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of us, it's easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
How often are we really prioritizing the process over that payoff?
Right.
This document actually had a really cool analogy about a probabilistic chessboard. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, it's a brilliant way to illustrate this point. So imagine you're playing chess,
Okay.
but like 10% of the time, your pieces just move randomly.
Oh,
It doesn't even matter how brilliant your strategy is. That random element, it guarantees you'll lose eventually. And life's kind of like that too, right? We can have goals and plans and, even talent. But if our execution is inconsistent, if we're not consistently applying those things, we're not setting ourselves up for that sustainable success.
So it's not just about having a great strategy.
Exactly.
It's about reducing those random errors.
Yes.
Those moments where we're not firing on all cylinders. This makes me think about all those areas in life where consistency is key. Like you wouldn't expect to run a marathon by just sprinting every now and then.
Right.
It takes dedicated, consistent training,
Absolutely.
which is a process.
Exactly. And it's not always about these like grand gestures or these overnight transformations. Sometimes the most powerful changes really come from those small, consistent actions that we repeat day after day. Like, think about it. You probably can't explain exactly how you ride a bike,
Right.
all those little, but you just do it.
Right.
And that's tacit knowledge. That's that unspoken expertise that we gain from consistent practice.
Okay, so we've got this tacit knowledge, this kind of internal compass we develop through experience. But how do we actually tap into it?
Right.
Because it's not like we can just download it
Right.
or articulate it easily. How do we learn from those who've already mastered a process, especially if they can't even fully explain how they do it?
Well, this is where this idea of positive deviance comes into play.
Okay.
So instead of just praising the high achievers, we need to really understand what they do differently. And the document gives us a really cool example.
Okay.
Imagine a husband who works with sabermetrics.
Sabermetrics.
Yeah, so that's like the statistical analysis of baseball. And his wife does humanitarian work in Vietnam.
Wow.
Totally different fields, right?
Yeah.
But through conversation, they realize that the husband's methods for analyzing baseball data can actually be applied to optimize her humanitarian efforts.
Wow. That's incredible. It's like their processes, though, seemingly from completely different worlds,
Right.
share some fundamental principles that could be applied across disciplines.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that a successful process in one area of your life might hold the key to unlocking potential in another.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
But it also kind of makes you think, if we can apply these principles across fields, doesn't that mean we need to be extra careful about the data we're basing them on?
That is a crucial point. And the document uses this really compelling World War II example to illustrate the dangers of just relying solely on visible data. So during the war, analysts would study returning aircraft to see where they were most frequently damaged,
Okay.
hoping to reinforce those areas on new planes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The problem was they were only looking at the planes that survived.
Oh, wow. So they're completely missing data from the planes that had been shot down.
Exactly.
And potentially misidentifying the most vulnerable areas that could have had disastrous consequences.
Exactly. Even with the best intentions, the survivor bias, it completely skewed their analysis. And it's such a powerful reminder to always question your data sources. Where is this information coming from? What might be missing? And we see this all the time today, right? Whether it's social media metrics or market research or even just interpreting news headlines.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but only looking at half the pieces.
Right.
So understanding how data is generated and what it doesn't represent is as crucial as the data itself.
Absolutely.
Man, I'm really starting to see how important this process lens really is.
Yeah.
It touches on so many different areas of life.
Yeah, and it's not just about avoiding these pitfalls.
Right.
A process-oriented mindset can actually help you leverage data more effectively.
Okay.
Think about it. Raw data is just that it's raw. It's the process of analyzing it, contextualizing it, and extracting meaningful insights that turns it into something valuable.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having a mountain of ingredients. They've got the potential for a great meal. But it takes a recipe, a process,
Yeah.
to actually bring that potential to life.
And just like a good recipe, a good process isn't about being rigid.
Right.
It's about having that flexibility to kind of adapt as you go.
That's true.
Because we often think of processes as these like fixed robotic things.
Yeah.
But the most successful ones are actually quite dynamic.
That makes sense,
Yeah.
especially if we're talking about applying these principles to something as complex and constantly changing as like our
Yeah.
careers
Right.
or our relationships. Having that built-in adaptability seems pretty crucial.
One thing that really stuck out to me in the document was this idea of process flexibility.
Yes.
How our ability to like adjust our approach on the fly, that's what makes us uniquely human. Not robotic at all.
It's about recognizing that the path to success, it's rarely a straight line.
Right. There are going to be detours, there are going to be roadblocks.
For sure.
Unexpected opportunities.
Right.
And it's our ability to navigate those twists and turns that ultimately determines whether we reach our destination.
Yeah, I love that. It's like that saying, the only constant is change.
Right.
So it's not about creating a process and then just putting it on autopilot.
Right.
It's about having that foundational structure, that framework for thinking,
Yeah.
but also being open to adjusting and iterating as needed.
Absolutely.
That reminds me of something else the document touched on, this idea that every interaction is a scene in someone else's story.
Oh, I love that.
It really made me stop and think about the ripple effects of our actions.
Yeah, that's such a powerful concept.
Right.
Because we often move through life so focused on our own stories, our own goals.
Yeah.
That we forget that everyone else is also the protagonist of their own narrative.
Yes.
And our actions, even the seemingly insignificant ones, can have a profound impact on those around us.
It's like that butterfly effect idea,
Yes.
but applied to human interaction.
Exactly.
We might not always see the full consequences of our choices.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they don't exist. So if every interaction is part of this larger web of like interconnected stories, how do we become more mindful of the roles we're playing and the impact we're having?
Well, a big part of it is simply paying closer attention.
Okay.
Really listening to what people are saying.
Okay.
Observing their body language, trying to understand their perspective. Because, we often jump to conclusions
Right.
or project our own assumptions onto others. But when we approach interactions with this process-oriented mindset,
Yeah.
we start to see those subtle cues, those hidden motivations that reveal what's really going on beneath the surface.
So it's about becoming more attuned to those unspoken signals.
Exactly.
Those subtle nuances that can make all the difference in our interactions. Like imagine you're, leading a team at work.
Yeah.
And you're about to introduce a new process.
Right.
If you just kind of bulldoze ahead without really considering the team's perspectives, their concerns,
Yeah.
you're likely to encounter some resistance.
Right. Of course.
But if you take the time to actually understand their individual workflows,
Right.
their tacit knowledge, right, of what's worked in the past,
Yes.
you can tailor that new process in a way that feels more collaborative and less disruptive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that effective communication, like any successful process, requires a deep understanding of your audience.
Right. It's almost like becoming a detective of human behavior.
Yes.
You start to pick up on the clues,
Right.
the patterns
Yeah.
that help us kind of make sense of why people act the way they do.
Yeah.
And that deeper understanding can be so valuable,
Oh, yeah.
not just in our professional lives, but also in our personal relationships as well.
Absolutely.
Speaking of relationships, I'm kind of curious to circle back to the process paradox you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
This idea that the more complex a task is,
Yes.
the more we need like a clearly defined process.
Right.
Yet the harder it is to actually define one.
Yeah.
And this seems especially relevant when you're talking about something as nuanced and ever evolving as like a romantic relationship.
Oh, absolutely.
How do we reconcile that need for structure with the fluidity and unpredictability of like love?
That's a great question. And I think the key here is to recognize that structure doesn't always have to be rigid.
Okay.
We often think of processes as these like step-by-step manuals,
Right.
but in reality, the most effective ones are often more like frameworks for thinking,
Okay.
for approaching challenges in a more intentional and strategic way.
So it's less about like having this checklist for a perfect relationship
Right.
and more about having a set of like guiding principles,
Exactly.
a shared understanding of how you'll navigate challenges and communicate effectively.
Exactly. And those principles, that framework for interaction, it can evolve over time as the relationship grows and changes.
Right. So it's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between spontaneity and intentionality,
Yes.
between following your heart and using your head.
Right.
It's about recognizing that even in those areas of life where process might seem kind of counterintuitive,
Right.
there's still a lot of value in having that thoughtful and adaptable approach.
Absolutely.
And this makes me think about all the other things that we tackle in life
Yeah.
that seem kind of inherently unstructured,
Okay.
like creative endeavors
Right.
or like personal growth journeys. It's tempting to think we just need to like go with the flow and hope for the best.
Right.
But I'm starting to see how having some kind of process, even a loose one,
Yeah.
can actually be incredibly freeing.
Absolutely. Think about it. Creativity often thrives in environments where there's this balance between structure and freedom.
Right.
Because if you have too much structure, it can stifle innovation. Too little, and you just end up with chaos and overwhelm.
Right.
And the same principle applies to personal growth too, right? Without a framework for self-reflection, for setting goals and tracking progress,
Right.
it's really easy to feel lost or stagnant.
Yeah.
But with a bit of structure, even just a simple journaling practice or a commitment to like learning something new each week,
Okay.
we can create the conditions for continuous growth and self-discovery.
So it's not that process stifles creativity or personal growth.
Right.
It's that the right kind of process, one that embraces flexibility and iteration, can actually enhance it. It's like we're building a greenhouse for our ideas and aspirations. We're not like dictating what will grow,
Right.
but we're creating the optimal conditions for growth to occur.
Exactly. And that's a much more empowering way to approach life, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Instead of feeling like we're at the mercy of these like external forces,
Right.
we start to see ourselves as these like active participants in shaping our own destinies.
Absolutely. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that this whole like process thinking thing, it's not always easy.
Oh, no.
It requires, I think, a certain level of self-awareness,
Right.
of being willing to honestly assess our strengths and weaknesses. And that can be, I don't know, it can be a little uncomfortable sometimes.
It can be very uncomfortable.
And I know I've definitely fallen into that trap of like clinging to old habits
Right.
or
Yeah.
avoiding tasks that just feel really daunting or overwhelming.
Yeah.
How do we overcome that resistance, that
Mm.
inner voice that tells us to just stick with what we know, even if it's not really working?
Yeah, you're right. It's that initial resistance, that
Yeah.
fear of the unknown. That I think holds a lot of us back.
Right.
But the document makes a really interesting point about this. It says that discomfort is often a sign of growth.
Ooh, I like that.
It's when we're stretching ourselves beyond those comfort zones, like trying new things and challenging our assumptions,
Right.
that we experience those like most profound transformations.
Yeah. It's like that saying, if you're not growing, you're dying.
Right.
But growth often requires us to confront those areas where we feel like stuck or inadequate.
Yeah.
And that can be a really vulnerable experience.
It can be. It's about embracing that vulnerability, that willingness to kind of be a beginner again.
You know, it makes me think about all the times I've put off learning a new skill or like tackling a challenging project
Yes.
simply because I was afraid of, looking foolish
Right,
or
yeah.
failing.
Of course.
But the document also talks about the importance of viewing failure not as this like setback,
Right.
but as valuable feedback.
Yes.
It's all part of that learning process.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective from I need to be perfect to I need to be willing to learn and grow.
Yes.
And that's where process thinking can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to approach those challenges with more curiosity, more experimentation, and less fear of judgment.
It's like we're giving ourselves permission to be works in progress,
Yeah.
to embrace that journey of like continuous improvement
Right.
rather than striving for some elusive destination of perfection.
Yeah.
Speaking of continuous improvement, the document also talks about the importance of seeking out examples of successful processes in action.
Yeah.
These process vignettes from all these different fields. I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we can all learn from each other,
Yeah,
regardless of our specific areas of expertise.
exactly. One example that really stood out to me was how the principles of lean manufacturing, which focuses on eliminating waste and streamlining processes,
Right.
can be applied to fields like healthcare,
Yeah.
education, even personal productivity.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's amazing. It's like these fundamental principles of efficiency and effectiveness, they just transcend industries. It makes you wonder, where else in life could we be applying these kind of cross-disciplinary lessons? Could the way a successful entrepreneur manages their time and resources, could that inspire how we approach our personal goals?
Absolutely.
Or could the collaborative processes used by, I don't know, a creative team, could that spark new ideas for improving communication within our families?
Yes, exactly. And that's where this process lens becomes so powerful. It allows us to see those connections, those underlying principles that might not be immediately obvious.
It's not about just mastering the processes within our own little fields.
Right.
It's about looking outside of our usual domains for inspiration, for new ways of thinking and approaching challenges.
Yeah.
It's about becoming students of process, always observing, experimenting, and refining our approaches based on what we learn.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like we're developing a sixth sense for process,
Right.
an intuition for what works and what doesn't.
Yes.
And that kind of reminds me of something you touched on earlier, this idea of developing process intuition.
Yes, that ability to almost instinctively sense the most effective path forward.
Yeah.
And you know that intuition isn't something we're born with. It's something we cultivate through practice, through trial and error, through paying attention to the feedback we receive along the way.
So it's like we're training our brains to see the world through this process lens.
Yes.
To constantly be analyzing, optimizing, and refining our approaches.
That's it.
It's a continuous feedback loop of learning and improvement.
Yes.
This has been such an insightful conversation. It has. And I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of this fascinating topic.
I know.
But as we kind of wrap up our deep dive for today, I'm curious to know, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will kind of carry with them as they navigate their own journeys of process improvement?
You know, if there's one thing I hope you'll take away from our conversation today, it's that trusting the process isn't about blindly following a set of rules.
Right.
It's about cultivating a mindset.
Okay.
A mindset of curiosity, of continuous improvement, and of always seeking out those hidden levers of excellence that exist in every aspect of life.
It's about embracing the journey with all of its twists and turns and recognizing that the pursuit of mastery itself is an ongoing process,
Yeah.
not a destination.
Beautifully said.
It's about falling in love with the how as much as the what.
And as you continue on your own journey of exploration, approach it with courage, with a willingness to learn, and with a deep appreciation for the power of process to transform your life.
This has been an incredible deep dive, and I hope everyone listening feels as energized and inspired as I do. Remember, even small changes to your process can lead to remarkable results over time. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep trusting the process.